and I will say to others, I do get angry. However, my anger never leads me to putting down persons, to make persons feel less than they are, or to make persons feel that they are not valuable in the sight of God. And I think I try to work with what Jesus taught his disciples. I can't say I win it all the time, but my wife will tell you that I do get angry. But she can testify to that side. Yes, I try to keep my expressions balanced. And there's a place for that in how we relate to one another. Relationship is always valuable and always important. One of the things that when we do not express some things outside, it is going to come out in other ways. And we don't want the things to come out in unhealthy ways, so we want to express them in healthy ways. So I want to say that as we begin, the reflection I want to lead us in this morning is about priestly preparation. And I think there may be a PowerPoint that brings this out. Thanks to my wife for helping with that. Very often in our society, we hear questions, where is God? And I want to focus on those verses in some verse in Malachi 3, especially verse 2. But who can endure the day of his coming? And who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire, and like fuller's soap. He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver, and he will purify the descendants of Levi, and refine them like silver and gold, until they present offerings to the Lord in righteousness. Let us pray. Dear God, we thank you for your word, and we thank you, Lord, that your word is sharper than a two-edged sword. We pray, Lord, that you will help us as we seek to meditate on your word this morning, to open our hearts to receive your word to us. And Lord, we pray that you will help us not only to hear what you say, to see what you are saying to our hearts, to have the courage and the humility to respond obediently to you. So, Lord, accept our reflections and our worship as our sacrifice to you this morning. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. As I started by saying, very often in our society we hear the question, where is God? Or why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? If God is so good, why doesn't he fix the problems we have in our country? The social problems, the economic problems, the problems with crime and violence. If God is so good, why doesn't he deal with them? The challenge is that this question comes not only from outside the church, but also within the church. Why are so many people sick and we can't seem to get them well? How is it that we offer our worship every day and not see some of the results we would like to see in the life and ministry of the church? What is the problem? Where are the shortcomings? The question is not unique to us as a church. It is not unique to this generation. It is not a unique problem to the church in the 21st century. In fact, the prophet Malachi was saying to the people, you have wearied the Lord with your words. How could people weary the Lord with their words? And they asked, how is this so? We are not aware of this. He says, because it seems to the Lord that all who are doing evil are considered to be good, and God delights in them. That all those people who are doing evil are considered to be good, and God delights in them. So where is the God of justice? That he doesn't challenge those who are doing evil, that he doesn't challenge those who are behaving in unjust ways. That's the question the prophet set out to answer. This was a situation which existed for many years. It's not an overnight problem. It's a problem which existed then as it exists now. It's a problem which we need to respond to. And we are going to look to see how we can handle that problem or respond today? Let's look closer at the problem. The claim was that injustice was so rife that people were asking, where is God? The assumption underlying that question is that a state of harmony and justice, equality and love and respect always exists where God is present. That's the underlying thought. Consistent with that, or consistent with godliness and the presence of God, it means that where these are absent, that God is also absent. Where there is the absence of equality, where is the absence of respect, where there is the absence of love for one another, then it means that God is not present. But do you really believe that in your heart, friends? That God is not present when we have the problems we have to deal with in our lives? The prophet himself was appalled at the state of injustice in his land at the time. The state of ungodliness. People had moved away from God, weren't worshiping God as God should. The state of corruption among the life of ordinary people and also among the priesthood. The state of unfaithfulness that existed among God's people. The religious leaders were carrying on the religious rites. Yes, they were taking sacrifices to the temple, but they were corrupt in their behavior. The people too were engaged in worshiping God, but there was no sincerity in their worship. They were singing praises to the Lord. They were mouthing the right words, but there was no sincerity to back up what they were saying. The confessions were there, the statements were there, but in their hearts, they were far from doing what was right. There was no sincerity. God was not pleased with their worship, which was insincere and corrupt. God was disappointed, and God was dissatisfied. From the prophet's perspective, moral governance was out of joint. Everybody seemed to be doing what was good in their own eyes. Good men felt no worth in worship, and they continued to offer less than their best to God. As you see that, I want you to get a picture of what was happening during Malachi's time. This period that Malachi prophesied was a time believed to be after the Israelites had returned from exile in Babylon. So they were now back in Jerusalem. They had already rebuilt the temple. They were re-engaged in worshiping in the temple. But there were issues. Haggai and Zechariah had picked up some of those issues. Haggai had pointed to the fact that they were not getting some blessings from God because they had neglected the house of the Lord. By this time with Malachi, they had restored the temple. So they were back in business in terms of worship. They were under the rule of a governor. And this was during a latter part of the 6th century to the beginning of the 5th century. Jerusalem as a city had lost its importance as a national or religious center. There was a spirit of depression which prevailed over the land. And there was also a spirit of cynicism over the land. And it was not that people were bad or blasphemous. And it was not that the blasphemous people were crying out to God or saying that, Lord, where are you? But the good people were also fed up with Orthodox religion. They felt that God was not doing enough. They felt that God who claimed he loved his people was missing in action. Can you imagine that people feel that God, who is a God who is supposed to be caring for his people and loving his people, was absent? Religion became sterile and dull. People were apathetic and stingy. That is why Malachi had to say, the Lord says, that you are not experiencing any blessing because you are withholding your tithe and offerings. But give them to God. And then you'll open your storehouses and you'll see if I don't fill them again. So the people were demonstrating stinginess before God. They would not bring the tithe and offerings into the storehouses according to verse 8 of chapter 3. Laymen, not priests, but ordinary persons, were failing to keep their vows to God and to each other. You know what they were doing? They were offering blemished animals to God as sacrifices. Now, when you're offering sacrifices to God, you were to offer unblemished animals. They were offering blemished animals to God. They were not offering the best. They were offering what left. If the people were bad, the priests were worse. They were just going through the motions. They offered blind, lame, sick animals to God as sacrifices. That's what the priests were doing. These would not have been offered to the governor in the land, yet they were being offered to God. Yahweh was being treated. Yahweh was not being treated well at all. Yahweh was being dissed by the people. This decline in religious fervor and commitment led to a corresponding decline in morals as well. So not only was there a decline in worship and the quality of worship, but there was a decline in the corresponding behavior of people who were blessed by God. A decline in the quality of their behavior. And I say that criminal behavior was rampant among them. The poor were oppressed. There was sorcery or witchcraft or Satan worship as we would know today. Adultery. Divorce was prevalent. And part of the reason why divorce was prevalent, and I need to indicate this, you name it, what happened is that the men who had just come back from exile, where they were told that they were to marry, they were to settle down in that land, when they came back to Jerusalem, they started divorcing their foreign wives to marry to the wives of the land. God said, I hate divorce. I want you to understand that context and that passage, and it does not apply to every single other passage, but understand it in that context. And what God was saying, He was addressing that particular issue and how the men back from exile were behaving. No wonder there was no blessing on the land. The decline in every area of social life was evident. The situation is not very different today. When we think of our situation in this country, when we think of our situation in this region, when we think of our situation in the world, we can say it's not very different today. There's nothing I have said here. There's nothing that Malachi encountered that we can't identify some of it that is present in our lands today. There's cynicism and apathy that prevail among people with respect to worship. Statistics are showing, recent statistics, even in Jamaica, that there's a growing number of people who go nowhere, who belong to no religious denomination, no religious affiliation, no connection. When you consider that this is right here in our midst, we recognize too that there are people in the church. They grow up in the church. They go through Sunday school. They participate in different ministries in the church, but they have never ever made a commitment of their life to Jesus Christ. And some of these persons, part of what happens to them and part of what happens to their life is that they get to a point where they begin to feel ashamed of even making a commitment because they think that other people thought that they were believers already. So instead of coming around and making a commitment, they say, no, they're not going to do it because they're ashamed, because people think they're saved already. People take the lives of others brutally and senselessly. The whole Baptist community is in mourning this morning. The members or people in Portland, East Portland, are mourning this morning through the brutal and senseless murder of the MP in that constituency, a deacon at the Port Antonio Baptist Church, a colleague of my wife. They studied together in Cuba. The brutal murder of an MP. Modern history shows that this is the second time that we have such a murder in recent history. Roy McGann was murdered some years ago in 1980 when we had political divisions and an election campaign. There's no election campaign right now. What is the issue? What is the concern? When we think of this kind of murder, when we think of people losing their lives in this way, religion and Orthodox Christianity is up for grabs. Anything goes for worship today. Worship is about feeling good rather than honoring God in some quarters. Worship is about appealing to the emotions rather than feeding the whole person. The one that sometimes some people go to worship and you ask, how was worship today? And they pause and say, I didn't feel good while I was there. Because worship is about feeling good. Worship, brothers and sisters, is not about feeling good. When you look at the life of Jesus, when Jesus went into the synagogue, there, of course, was the time that Jesus read the scroll. And the scroll was read and Jesus commented on it. And the Pharisees, he said, now is the scripture fulfilled in your ears today. That's appealing to the mind. They sung the Psalms, and the Psalms were arousing, and the Psalms were expressions of worship. Yes, they clapped their hands and celebrated. But there are also times when they made confession. There are some times when they prayed. There are some times when they honored God. There are times when they fasted, and that is why Jesus said, when you pray, this is how you do it. When you fast, this is how you do it. All of these components were present and evident in worship because God's people need to respond to God in different ways. Not only in some areas. Everybody these days is an authority on worship. Worship and indeed Christianity has become like a buffet line. You go to church for some things, but you leave out the other things which you didn't sign up for. Christians continue to display a sense of godliness, which is sometimes void of any sincerity and love for one's neighbor. Jesus said there are two commandments, which are greater than all the other commandments. He never said the other commandments are good, but he said these are the greatest. To love the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. We have to pull back, we have to pause and ask, how do we love God with all of our being? How do we love God with all of our mind, our soul, and our strength? And how do we love our neighbors as we love ourselves? If we begin to think about it, my brothers and sisters, the way we love our neighbor is an indication that we don't really love ourselves very much. If we think of some of the ways we reach out to our neighbors, we see that we really don't love ourselves very much. When is there going to be an end to the senseless violence taking place in our country? When we feel God is absent, we sometimes create our own gods. And when we fill the space with our own gods, like when Moses left the children of Israel at the foot of the mountain and went to commune with God, they said, Moses gone and God gone, so we have to create our own gods. And so they put all they had together and made a golden calf and worship that golden calf. I say, my brothers and sisters, in our lives when we feel that God is absent, we create golden calves. And it is also sad that even before we feel God is absent, we begin to create golden calves. I will not go on to enumerate the ways in which we create these golden calves. But anything, any institution, any object that we give our allegiance and honor and commitment and faithfulness to usurps the place of God in our lives. The prophet challenged the hypocrisy of the people and declared that the Lord not only delighted in their outward compliance to the law, but he wanted inward acceptance as well. Their wickedness, hypocrisy, and false security were too much for the Lord. He wanted a change. God wanted a change in the life of God's people. Brothers and sisters, I am saying to us this morning, I am saying to us on this Sunday when we're talking about renewal in Christ, I'm saying on this Sunday when the Baptist world community is celebrating the founding of Baptist togetherness and Baptist unity across the world. I'm saying this as we continue to reflect on the revelation of Christ, on the light of Christ in the world in this season of Epiphany. The day after Christ was presented in the temple, where Simeon and Anna received, and I say a little more about those. In this particular day, I am appealing to us as God's people to understand that while we reflect on the society around us, it is not for us to become it is not for us to see what is happening out there as distant from us, but it is for us to ask, Lord, how can we make a difference in the society in which you have placed us? And so I want to look, having identified the problem, I want to look at the Lord's proposal to address the problem. The Lord says, the prophet says, the Lord will send a messenger, and the Lord will come himself. When you read this passage, the messenger is identified in some way with John the Baptist. But later it says the Lord will come himself. And the writer is at pains to make the point that the Lord coming himself is certainly not John the Baptist. This is the response from the people for God to deliver them from the state of apathy and seeming silence from God. God sends his Son. God has come down himself. Friends, I want us to remember that God never lets us down. God never lets us down. You remember when the children of Israel cried out to God when they were under bondage in Egypt? God said, I have heard your cries. I have heard your sorrows. I have seen your tears, and I am come down to deliver you. God never leaves his people. God never abandons us. And when we call to God earnestly and sincerely, we have that confidence that God will hear us. God is the one who comes to deliver. He comes to purify and to purge. The prophet uses two images to convey the judgment that God will unleash on God's people. These are the images of refiner and purifier of metals, precious metals, silver and gold. The refiner sits before the fire, over which the metal is being melted. And you can see in the corner there of the image. The refiner sits before the fire, over which the metal is being melted. As the metal is melted, the dross and debris and impurities will flow to the cup and will be siphoned off, and the pure metal will remain in the container. The test of the completion of the refining process is when the refiner can see his image reflected in the metal when he looks at it in the container used to hold the molten metal. That's the test. The test is when the refiner looks in that container there. And when he looks at it, after he has removed the debris and the dross, the refiner can see his image reflected in the metal. The lessons, my brothers and sisters, are crystal clear. They are crystal clear. But before the lessons, I want to look at two verses in the New Testament. 1 Corinthians 3:13. Every man's work will be made manifest, for the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire, and the fire shall try every man's work of what sort it is. We can note this in relation to that verse. Also, 2 Timothy 2:20. But in a great house there are not only vessels of gold and silver, but also of wood and of earth, and some to honor and some to dishonor. If a man therefore purge himself from these, he shall be a vessel unto honor, sanctified and meet for the master's use, and prepared unto every good work. There's a sense in which God purifies our lives. God cleanses our life so that we can be honored vessels. Refining then is a melting process. It's melting metals, as I said, to remove impurities. And when that is done, heat is necessary. The metals, refining can be a difficult process, but necessary. Heat is equivalent to pain and difficulties in the believer's life. Last month we talked about count it all joy when you have trials. When you go through difficulties as believers, count it all joy. When you go through difficulties, praise the Lord, because there is a purpose in all of that pain. The metal to be molten requires heat, and that heat has to be applied at a very high temperature, a temperature which has to be above the boiling point of the metal being liquefied. It means that the container being used has to have a higher boiling point than the metal. Understand? Because if the container which is made of metal will melt when you put the other metal in it, then it means that everything is going to melt out. But the container has to have a higher temperature, boiling point temperature, than the other things within it. You can't see the image, friends? God sees us as vessels that contain the Spirit of God. We are the vessels that contain the challenges, the decisions we have to make. And sometimes when we go through those, we may think that we can't cope, but God knows that we are able. What is required is that we need to honor God, we need to lean on God, we need to trust in God. God has to take His people through heat so that He can remove the impurities from our lives. It is only when the impurities are removed from our lives that we can reflect the very image of God. Do you get that, friend? It is only when the impurities are removed from our lives that we can reflect the very image of God. The process is painful but essential. There is no alternative to purging and purifying metal, as it is precious and valuable. Metal, however, while it is in that container, is passive, but the believer is not passive. Come with me now. The metal is passive. The metal sits there and allows itself to be melted. But the believer is not passive. The believer has a will. The metal has no will. But each of us must choose to cooperate with what God is doing in our lives. This is where the difference comes. We have to choose to cooperate with God. We have to deliberately put away sin from our lives. We have to deliberately resist the temptations that come our way. Whatever is needed for us, brothers and sisters, whatever is needed to help us to put away sin, and to let God know that we are serious, and to let the devil know that we are moving away from being in his company, we need to do what is required. Are you with me on that? Yes. Sometimes when we fast, we might see it as a period where we're going through testing. We may see it as a period as we draw close to God. We are denying ourselves some of those things that we find precious in our lives. Some things we need to put away from us, and we need to say, these things do not define our lives. In our lives, we have to understand that God wants to cleanse us. It is not only the image of purifying or purging that is used, but there is also the purging with soap. So it is not only metals that are refined, but soap is used. It's a soap that is a bleaching soap. It is a special soap. A soap that is not only antiseptic and remove, it is a bleaching soap. It's described as a soap that makes white materials white. It washes away dirt. And you know, dirt can cling to our bodies so much that after a while it looks like us. Sometimes it is sad to say you pass and my heart is moved when I see some homeless person on the street. They look really dirty. I remember some years ago, one of our playwrights had a play on one of these street persons, where this person took one of these men from off the street, cleaned him up, fixed him up well, and it's like she was taking him as her partner, but she cleaned him up, sought to restore sanity in his life and sought to make him good again. And then, of course, they had challenges along the way, but she was making him. Sometimes dirt gets onto us, and it looks like us. It appears to be part of our persona. It appears to be part of the texture of our skin, our body color, and we see no difference between dirt and who we are. The Old Testament image of cleansing is very popular and very clear. David said, "Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Cleanse me with hyssop." What is being cleansed? It is sin which distorts. It is sin which defiles. It is sin which destroys. David is crying out to God, "Cleanse me, wash me of this which destroys." Sin robs us of the presence and power of God. And sin separates us from God. So sometimes, my friends, my brothers and sisters, fellow saints, when you feel far from God, it could be the sins in your life prevent you from experiencing that closeness. It could be those sins in your life. To be cleansed requires an admission that we are dirty and need cleaning. You know, sometimes we send children to go get a bath, and they like the water, and they spill the water all over the back. Mommy, I bathed already. Daddy, I bathed already. And all of this splash up in the bath, they don't bathe yet. No washing. You have to go back and wash behind the ears, wash the arm properly. You have to go and do the washing, because they have poured the water over them, but they're not washed yet. Sometimes that's what happens in our lives, friends. The water is poured over us. We go through the blessing, we go through the nice time, but we're not cleansed. We're not cleansed. When the cleansing comes, we have to admit that we're dirty. We have to admit that there are corners and crevices in our lives that need cleansing. We have to admit that there are some secret sins we're hiding. We have to admit that there are some things in our life that only God can purge. We can't do it ourselves. Sometimes others may see the dirt where we cannot, and hence we need to trust others when they tell us what they see, and we'll tell them mind their own business. We need to be open and responsive when others tell us what they see. Sometimes we have behaviors that cannot be explained and we cannot cope with, rather than leave the church of Jesus Christ, because some people say they don't want to have anything to do with the church at all. Because they feel bad, they feel guilty, and they can't get themselves cleaned up in order to serve God fully. Let me remind us, brothers and sisters, it is the Lord who is like the refiner's fire and like fuller's soap. It is He who will purify His covenant people and desires our feelings, despite our feelings or fears about the matter. This is actually good news for all of us. Sin separates us from God. Indeed, sin clothes and distorts the good creation God made us to be. we are helpless to clean ourselves. Enter the refiner of gold and silver. Enter the washer of clothes to do the cleaning up for us. God is the one who comes, says the prophet. He's the one who comes. And in as much as this is one of the readings for the presentation of Jesus, it is Jesus our Lord who is presented during the season of Epiphany. It is Jesus who is presented in the New Testament passage that we read. And Simeon, when he saw Jesus, Jesus was an ordinary baby. He never had any cross on his forehead. He never had anything about him to make him stand out as the prophet of which the prophecy had predicted. There's nothing about Jesus which told him he didn't have any birthmark so that Simeon could know. But the Spirit of God communicated to the spirit of Simeon that this is a special child. And when Simeon received in the temple that child, he said, "No, Lord, let us thou thy servant depart in peace." God come. God come. God has come in the flesh. He said, "No, let us thou thy servant depart in peace." And there is an elderly lady. So it is the witness of the senior members of the community. Anna, a widow of over 80 years, 4 years and 4, that's what the passage said. Over 84 years. It is this widow and Simeon, the senior citizens in the community, who discerned what God was doing and who could testify, yes, this is the Son of God. It is God who has come to deliver us from all that we are lamenting about. It is God who has come to deliver us from all that we feel afraid about. It is God who has come to deliver us. God has come to live in our lives to make a difference. The whole community of faith will be cleansed. However, in the passage, the prophet talks about the sons of Levi. And I want to pause on that a little. The sons of Levi were singled out because the sons of Levi were the priests. There's a sense, though, in which all of us are priests. Hallelujah. All of us are priests. We are a royal priesthood. We are a holy nation. We are all priests to God. We all need to be cleansed so that we are in a position to stand in the gap for God. I wonder where we are with that. As we consider ourselves priests, I rush to my final point. That is the purpose to be accomplished. God's purpose is to prepare His people to be effective in the mission He has given. When we understand that as church, we will not lament and complain and bellyache when we are going through the refiner's fire, and then we have to be scrubbed with a fuller soul. God has one purpose, and one purpose only, and that is to make us fit for duty. God has one purpose, and that is to make us fit for duty. The purpose of this process is to remove the impurities of our character, to restore integrity, to restore moral direction. That is why David said, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." David was saying that in my act, in my secret sin, in my act of committing adultery, of looking on this woman and lusting after her, in my heart of doing that, I need the cleansing of my heart. Your sin may not be like that of David's. It may be some other sin. But the same prayer is necessary. Create in me a clean heart, O God. We all need this exercise. That's what we do, my brothers and sisters, when we clean up our computers, when we change the engine oil and transmission oil in our cars, or when we tip our shoes because we have worn them down, or we service our ACs in units in our offices, or in our houses. It is to make these equipment fit for service, more efficient in their use. Isn't that what we do? It amazes me then when the church encounters a little inconvenience for service or to reach the lost, that there are so many persons who may complain. That sometimes we go through a little rough patch in our lives, and that is a patch of which we complain so much, it makes us wonder if God is still there for us. Friends, we must not be ungrateful enough. We must not be ungrateful. We must remember that God is always there. The purifying and cleansing purpose of fire and soap makes the process an inevitable stage in the believer's preparation for the journey of being God's priest in this world. We are God's priest. That's why the topic of my reflection this morning is priestly preparation. We're all being prepared as God's priests in the world. And so, as I wrap up, I want us to focus on some questions, which is projected. Some questions we need to ask ourselves as priests. Are we fit for duty? Can God's image be reflected in us? Can God's image be seen in us? When we say God is with us, are people seeing God's image reflected in us, or are they seeing something else? Are we allowing ourselves to be washed properly, purged carefully, so that we can stand in the gap for the church? We are praying and fasting during this period. Are we allowing ourselves to be cleansed, to be purged, so we can stand in the gap? We can stand in the gap for the community, for the youth of our land, for those bleeding from violence in our country. What is the cost we are willing to pay? What cost? Are we willing to allow ourselves to be burned, to be refined? As we make our priestly preparation, what's the problem? We have identified it. What is the proposal for responding to the problem? God sent the refiner's fire, and He sends the purging soap. What is the purpose of such a proposal? It is that God is making us cleaner and purer, and God is removing those things that destroy our character, so that we can be better persons to serve God. I ask you, are you ready to be used by God in this process of priestly preparation? Amen. Let's bow our heads a moment of prayer before God. Dear God, how we love you, honor you. We also confess, O Lord, that we are not as close to you as we ought. That we do not always follow you as we should. But Lord, sometimes we are far from you. And we ask, Lord, that you will forgive us. We ask, O Lord, that we will cease from turning a blind eye to evil in the world and in our lives. And we will seek, however, to surrender to you, to allow you to cleanse us so that we can be more effective in the proclamation of your word. We can be more effective in how we live, that others will see you reflected in our lives. Lord, hear our prayers. Lord, listen prayerfully. Change my heart, O God. let it ever be.